What they did to these Mexican farm workers will make your blood boil. Over 50 families trapped in modern-day slavery on California's largest farms, not paid wages for months, threatened with deportation, living in conditions that would shock you. The authorities ignored their cries for help. The union leaders were too scared to act. But then 73-year-old Eduardo Vargas, a quiet, small farmer they all dismissed as just another old Mexican, heard what was happening to his people. What he did next will leave you speechless. Welcome to the Vietnam Stories. Before we begin this powerful tale, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. In the vast agricultural lands of Fresno County, California, Eduardo Vargas's 15-acre small farm was lost among the giant plantations. 73-year-old Eddie would wake up at 5:30 every morning and check his land. He grew tomatoes, lettuce, and peppers, not as profitable as the big companies, but enough to pay his workers fair wages. Eddie's farm was located outside the city of Delano, in an area where Mexican workers lived densely. The large farms surrounding it, Riverside Farms, Golden Valley Agriculture, Central Coast Growers, overshadowed Eddie's modest place with their thousands of acres. This morning, like always, Eddie got into his old Ford pickup truck and began touring his property. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the workers had already started working. Eddie employed 8 Mexican workers, all working legally with fair wages. "Buenos días, don Eduardo," said Rosa Martinez, one of the workers holding a coffee cup. "Buenos días, Rosa. How are things going?" Eddie asked in Spanish. "Good, boss. The tomato harvest will be finished this week," Rosa replied with a smile. Eddie could see that Rosa was happy, because workers here received real wages, had health insurance, and were treated humanely. But the situation was very different in neighboring farms. At the eastern border of his farm, Riverside Farms' giant property began. Eddie frowned as he looked in that direction. He knew the condition of the workers there but couldn't prove it. Between Eddie's farm and Riverside Farms there was only a wire fence. 2 weeks ago, while Eddie was watering his field in the morning, he had heard sounds coming from the neighboring farm. Shouting sounds, screams full of fear, but who would work at 6 a.m.? That afternoon, while Eddie was working near the border with his tractor, a young Mexican woman approached from the other side of the wire fence. The woman was in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Señor, por favor, ayúdame," the woman whispered in broken English. "Help me, please." Eddie got down from the tractor and approached the wire fence. "¿Qué pasa, mija? What happened?" he asked. I work at Riverside. They kidnapped us. Don't pay money, don't show documents. I'm scared," the woman said, tears in her eyes. Eddie's heart raced. He had investigated human rights violations in Vietnam and knew this situation. "How many people are there?" he asked. "About 50 people, families, children too. They said if we escape, they'll turn us over to police, deport us," the woman explained. At that moment, the sound of a jeep came from the distance. The woman panicked, saying, "They're coming," and ran away from the wire fence. Eddie couldn't sleep that night. The oppression he had seen in Vietnam 50 years ago came to mind. There too, powerless people were being exploited. This time, he wouldn't stay silent. The next morning, Eddie made a plan. He took his old Jeep and headed toward Riverside Farms' main building. He would make a neighborly visit with farm owner George Blackwood. Riverside Farms' office was in a modern building, furnished with air conditioning and luxury furniture. The secretary was a young woman who greeted Eddie with a contemptuous look. "Mr. Blackwood is very busy. You need to make an appointment," the secretary said coldly. "I'm a neighboring farm owner. I just wanted to say hello," Eddie said calmly. At that moment, a thick-voiced man came out from inside. George Blackwood was a man in his 50s, fat and arrogant. "Who are you?" Blackwood asked, looking Eddie up and down. "Eduardo Vargas, neighboring farm owner. I wanted to meet you," Eddie said politely. Blackwood laughed. Ah, the owner of that little piece of land, what do you want? Are you having worker problems? I know quality workers, I can help, Eddie said, hiding his real intention. We don't have worker problems. Our workers are very satisfied. We don't need you, Blackwood said harshly. Eddie noticed that Blackwood was nervous. I understand. If you need help, you know where to find me, he said and left. As he went outside, Eddie saw the worker accommodation area. Old containers, an area surrounded by wire fences, security cameras. It was like a prison. Eddie couldn't sleep that night. He had seen similar situations in Vietnam, oppressive systems that controlled innocent people. The next night, after dark fell, Eddie quietly approached the border of Riverside Farms. Using the covert movement techniques he learned 50 years ago, he reached the wire fence. Sounds were coming from the worker accommodation area. Crying sounds, fearful whispers. Eddie took out his old military binoculars and began observing the area. What he saw broke his heart. Dozens of people were living cramped in 15 to 20 containers. There were children too. At that moment, a security guard passed by on patrol. Eddie hid and understood he would wait. He would observe until morning. At 4:30 a.m., workers were forcibly awakened. Security guards were shouting, "Get up, let's get to work." Workers were running to the fields in fear. Eddie saw that women and children were also forced to work. 8, 9-year-old children were carrying heavy sacks. This was illegal and inhumane. The next day, while Eddie was working on his farm, he saw someone coming from behind the wire fence. It was the woman he had spoken to yesterday. "Señor Eduardo, will you help us?" the woman whispered. "Of course, mija." "What's your name?" Eddie asked. "Carmen. Carmen Rodriguez. They brought me and my family from Mexico. They promised work, but now we're like prisoners," Carmen said. "How many families are there?" Eddie asked. 12 families. Total 50 people. Children have to work too. Some are sick, but they don't bring doctors," Carmen explained. Eddie's experiences in Vietnam came to mind. There too he had to protect civilian population. "Carmen, trust me. I'll save you, but be patient," he said. "But how? They have guns, they have dogs. If we escape, they'll kill us," Carmen said with fear. "I'm also an old soldier, Carmen. I've seen worse than this in Vietnam. I'll find a way," Eddie said determinedly. That night, Eddie sat at home, examining his old military notes. In Vietnam between 1969 to 1972, he had investigated human rights violations and reported abusive commanders. He would use this experience now. First, he needed to gather evidence. He took his phone and called his old Vietnam friend, Maria Santos. Maria was now an immigration lawyer. "Maria, it's Eddie. I've encountered a situation. I need your help," Eddie said. "What happened, Eddie? Your voice sounds tense," Maria said. "There's forced labor at the neighboring farm, 50 Mexican workers, including children. I'm gathering evidence but need legal help," Eddie explained. "Eddie, this is very dangerous. Report it to the FBI," Maria said. "Maria, you know me. They said the same thing in Vietnam, but I'll do what's right," Eddie said determinedly. "Okay, Eddie. I know what you need to do. I'll give you legal advice, but be careful," Maria said. The next night, Eddie came more prepared. He was equipped with his old military camera, voice recording device, and night vision goggles. The surveillance techniques he learned in Vietnam would come in handy. At 11 p.m., Eddie quietly circled around Riverside Farms. He video recorded the worker accommodation area. He documented the crowds inside the containers, children, sick people. At 4 a.m., he recorded the workers being forcibly awakened. He heard and recorded a security guard shouting, "Move it, you lazy Mexicans!" In the field, he saw an 8-year-old child working. When the child fell while trying to carry a heavy sack, a security guard kicked him. Eddie trembled with anger but remained patient. He was gathering evidence. At noon, Eddie recorded the foreman talking to workers. "You don't get paid until quota is met. No complaints, no doctors, no problems." the foreman said. This was clear forced labor evidence. Eddie was ready to act now. But first, he needed to communicate with the workers. He met Carmen at the wire fence. "Carmen, we'll act tonight. Get ready," Eddie said. "How?" Carmen asked. "I'll rescue you from here, but you need to be brave," Eddie said. "Senor Eddie, do you have guns? They're very dangerous," Carmen said. "Carmen, war isn't won only with weapons. It's also won with intelligence," Eddie said, sharing the lesson he learned from Vietnam. That night, Eddie put his plan into action. First, he needed to cut Riverside's electricity. Using old Vietnam techniques, he sabotaged the main electric cable. When darkness fell, security guards panicked. Eddie used this opportunity to approach the containers. "Carmen, here I am," he whispered. Carmen and her family were ready. Eddie signaled them and led them out through a secret passage in the wire fence. "Quick, let's go," Eddie said, and took the group to his own farm. Eddie had turned the barn on his farm into a temporary shelter for Carmen's family. The family of 7, Carmen, her husband Miguel, 3 children, and elderly parents. "Here you are safe," Eddie said. "Gracias, Señor Eddie, pero others are still there," Miguel said. "Miguel, I'll save them all, but patience is needed," Eddie said. That night, Eddie called his lawyer friend Maria and reported the situation. "Eddie, you've done great work. Now I'll take Carmen's testimony. This is very important for the legal case," Maria said. Carmen's statement was shocking. "They brought us from Mexico. They said $15 per hour, but they never gave money. They made my children work too. I got sick, asked for doctor. They said work or starve," Carmen told through tears. Eddie recorded this statement. He would use it as legal evidence. With Maria's help, Eddie contacted the FBI. Agent Rodriguez was a specialist in human trafficking cases. "Mr. Vargas, these are very serious accusations. Do you have evidence?" Agent Rodriguez asked. Eddie showed video recordings, audio recordings, and Carmen's statement. "This is solid evidence. We'll plan an operation, but we'll need your help too," Agent Rodriguez said. "What do I need to do?" Eddie asked. "We need inside information. How many people are there? Where are the weapons? How is security organized?" Agent Rodriguez said. Eddie smiled. "Agent Rodriguez, I did these kinds of operations in Vietnam. I'll give you a detailed reconnaissance report." Eddie conducted detailed surveillance for 3 days. He mapped out Riverside Farms completely. 43 people in 12 containers, 6 security guards, 4 armed foremen, 2 dogs. The FBI prepared the plan. At 6 a.m. when workers were going to the fields, the operation would begin. Operation Day came. Eddie would guide the FBI team. Alongside Agent Rodriguez, they secretly approached Riverside. "Mr. Vargas, where are the positions?" Agent Rodriguez asked. "Guard tower on the left, dogs on the right, foreman in the field," Eddie said professionally. The FBI team took position. Eddie's intelligence was perfect. "Go, go, go," came the command. FBI agents entered quickly. All criminals were caught in 20 minutes. George Blackwood was caught while trying to escape. Workers were rescued, children were crying, women were giving thanks. "Thank God, we are free," an elderly woman shouted. Eddie called to them in Spanish. "Ya están seguros, you are safe now." A month later, George Blackwood and his team were tried in federal court. Human trafficking, forced labor, child labor. They received a total of 25 years in prison. Eddie offered legal work on his own farm to the workers he rescued. Carmen and her family permanently began working on Eddie's farm. "Don Eduardo, usted es nuestro héroe," Carmen said happily. "Carmen, I'm not a hero, I just did what was right," Eddie said humbly. The local newspaper wrote Eddie's story with the headline, "Local Farmer Saves 43 Workers." But Eddie refused to give interviews. "I don't want publicity. The workers are safe. That's enough," he told the reporter. That evening, Eddie sat on his farm's porch, watching the sunset. Carmen's children were playing in the garden. They were free now. Eddie's neighbor, Jim Collins, came to visit. "Eddie, I heard what happened. You've become a real hero." Jim said. Jim, I'm just a farmer. I used what I learned in Vietnam here, Eddie said. But you saved 43 people's lives. This is big work, Jim said. Jim, everyone can make a difference where they are. I just did what I could here, Eddie said. That night, Eddie looked at his old military photographs. His friends in Vietnam, human rights missions, civilian protection operations. 50 years later, he had continued the same mission in civilian life. 6 months later, Eddie's farm had become a model. 15 Mexican families were working legally, receiving fair wages, getting health insurance, children were going to school. Carmen was now Eddie's assistant manager. Don Eduardo, we started a new life thanks to you. How can we thank you? Carmen asked. Carmen, the biggest thanks is your children playing and laughing, Eddie said. Eddie never saw himself as a hero. He had just applied the values he learned in Vietnam. Human rights, justice, protecting the innocent in civilian life. And every morning at 5:30, while waking up and checking his land, Eddie knew that the real war is fought continuously every day. Against injustice, against oppression, to protect the powerless. Because real heroes continue their duty after they stop wearing uniforms. Only the battlefield changes. Eduardo Vargas still works on his farm, protects workers, and fights for justice. The lessons he learned in Vietnam, protect those who cannot protect themselves. He lives every day. Because heroism is not a rank, it's a way of life. Now I ask you, have you ever met someone who worked quietly but emerged when needed like this? Maybe you too encountered an Eduardo Vargas but didn't realize it. Share their stories in the comments. Because at the Vietnam Stories, we believe that the greatest heroism is sometimes hidden in the most ordinary farms. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, and remember, justice is real. It just waits for the person to fight for it. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, if you see an old farmer working his land, look at him with respect. Maybe he's the Eduardo who could save your community.